I like to think of life as a game, where if you're building a character in a role-playing game, you can build a glass cannon, right? Where you just have the one aspect that you max out. So you have like the wizard character who can cast the nuclear warhead equivalent of a fireball, but anytime someone sneezes in his direction, he immediately dies, right? Because he's just so fragile. Again, like, okay, if you deploy this character in certain ways, maybe that has an advantage. But I would rather have a well-rounded character who can kind of do a bit of everything and performs well in different scenarios. I don't think of myself as a high performer. Okay, I don't think of myself as this super high performing individual, and it's also not a goal of mine to be a super high performer. That might sound weird because for more than 10 years of my life, I have been very interested in self-development and in optimizing systems and in becoming more productive and so on. And yet something about the term high performer just evokes an image for me that I really don't connect with. On the one hand, it gives me this image of, someone who's like the class valedictorian and the team captain and how I got 3 PhDs at the same time while also learning Japanese kind of thing, I'm really, really not like that. I'm extremely not like that. I don't know how that... People who are like that, who seem to be just great at everything, have always seemed very alien to me. I've always been either someone who kind of just looks at that and goes, I have no idea what's going on here. Or, in some cases, I was the one who was getting bullied by those kinds of people, right? But I'm definitely not one of those people. If I think about people who are really into being super high performing, another thing that comes to mind for me is this kind of the hustle culture thing, someone who wakes up at 4:30 in the morning and does a workout and then does a meditation and then listens to an audiobook at triple speed and then, basically does like 12 hours of work in the first 3 hours of the day and just keeps going until I guess they drop dead after a few months of doing this or something, right? This just extreme high performance at all costs kind of attitude, which also I don't relate to at all. So let's see if we can kind of square this circle and make sense of this. How can I be so interested in optimizing my life and in improving my skills and becoming more productive, but still feel like, no, this is not about super high performance? If you want to be a super high performer at anything, it always comes at a cost. And that cost is maybe not always obvious, but there's always a large sacrifice involved. And I think high performance in athletics is probably a great example of this. If you want to be like a world-class athlete in almost any discipline, you are basically sacrificing your physical body to do that. And in some sports, that's much more obvious than in others, right? If you think about American football, for example, you basically throw your body in, bash it against all these other bodies, and I don't know what the average career length is, like 3 years or something, right? Because you're just really breaking yourself. And similarly with things like, boxing or MMA, where you see the kind of tragedy of, a 35-year-old MMA fighter who seems slow and kind of sluggish compared to the younger competitors, and often, some ugly things with like memory loss and things like that happening, right? Where it's pretty clear that, okay, the only way to be at the top of the game here is you have to sacrifice your health in order to be that high of a performer. And I think the same is true in other areas as well. The narrow pursuit of some singular goal always comes at a sacrifice. And one of the reasons why I'm not interested in doing that is because I know what comes next. Like, you can narrowly pursue something like, I'm going to build the best possible physique, or I'm going to make all this money, or whatever it is that you want, or I'm going to have all these social media followers. Some goal like that where I'm going to be the highest performing entrepreneur, influencer, whatever. And what happens in that pursuit, even if you're successful in that pursuit, it brings you to a point where you realize like, this doesn't actually give me what I wanted. This doesn't actually make my life better in the ways that I hoped it would. And I think that you generally get to the point where you feel like, I wish I hadn't sacrificed so much in pursuit of this one goal. There's an interesting book on this, on the top regrets of dying people. And I think the number one top regret is I wish I hadn't worked so much. Where people are coming to that realization that their career was so important to them. It's like, okay, have a better career, make more money and so on. But on their deathbeds, they look back and go, I wish I hadn't done that. And I think that is the kind of thing that is always at the end of a pursuit of performance over everything else. I think the reason this happens is because of the availability heuristic, or the availability bias. So this is a psychological bias where things that are easier to remember seem more important than things that are more difficult to remember. Seeing someone who is in great shape and who is, flashing cash and a Rolex and driving a fancy car, that is the thing that is the easiest to depict. It's the easiest. You can capture it in an image. That's the stuff that stands out the most. That's the stuff that's easiest to remember, but it's not actually the most important stuff. As a person, as a human being, what did you actually want? Well, you probably want connection. You want real connection with another human being. You want a good, healthy, relationship, a constructive relationship where you and your partner build each other up. You want to live a good life and feel good about yourself and so on. These things are not things that you can easily flash on social media for likes and validation, right? How do you take a picture of someone who's confident and has a strong, healthy relationship with someone? Well, it's like, I don't know, what, two people smiling at each other? This doesn't quite cover it, right? So much easier to just say, hey, look, I'm attractive and rich. That I can easily take a picture of. In other words, the answer is basically much more complicated than just get jacked and get rich, but it leads to the outcome that I actually want. That also means that I can't be a specialist in just one thing, and I don't want to be for this reason. I don't want to simply be the most jacked person, right? Become a bodybuilder. That's not what I want. I also don't want to be just the richest person and just have my entire life just revolve around money. And neither do I want to be like the singular specialist in any one thing. Because if I think about what do I really want out of life, I end up with this complex picture that basically tells me what I need to do is develop different skills and different characteristics across a wider range. Now, a good reference for this is a book called Range by David Epstein, which talks in depth about the difference between being a specialist and the advantages and disadvantages that has, and being more of a jack of all trades and the disadvantages and the many surprising advantages that has. So that is the trade-off that I want to make in my life and that I have been making in my life. I am never going to be a super specialist or, if you will, a super high performer in one area. I want to be a jack of all trades, which is kind of less spectacular and less, again, it's like you can't demonstrate that, you can't flaunt that. And it's also not as, I think in our culture, it's basically cooler or it's more acceptable to be a specialist, right? That's kind of the right thing to do in a way. But I choose not to do that because I am trying to live more in line with my actual life goals and not with like social expectations or what would get me validation or like, again, these images that give us a wrong sense of priority. I like to think of life as a game. And it really works as well if you think about this in the context of games. So first of all, my goal is also not to just be the best player of the game, because that requires min-maxing, right? So if I'm thinking about, what is a super high performance gamer? I'm thinking about some Korean kid who's, doing some crazy training to be able to click the mouse 10,000 times per second or something crazy, right? Whereas like they're doing all this extreme stuff to get a tiny edge in some aspect of a game. And it's like, listen, it's impressive, right? More power to you. But I'm like over here playing the game being like, no, I'm nowhere near as good as that. And I also don't want to be, because I'm playing this game to have fun, right? I'm actually enjoying this game. I'm not torturing myself, giving myself carpal tunnel syndrome so that I can eke out a little bit of an advantage in this game, right? And again, that is a trade-off. That is a trade-off. I'm never going to be the best guy. I'm never going to be in the spotlight. But I'd rather be just playing this game, decently, but not at a super high level, but actually having fun. And another aspect of this, right, if you think about specialization versus having a range of skills, is if you think about it in like a role-playing game scenario, where if you're building a character in a role-playing game, you can build a glass cannon, right, where you just have the one aspect that you max out. So you have like the wizard character who can cast the nuclear warhead equivalent of a fireball, but anytime someone sneezes in his direction, he immediately dies, right? Because he's just so fragile. And again, like, okay, if you deploy this character in certain ways, maybe that has an advantage. But I would rather have a well-rounded character who can kind of do a bit of everything and you know, performs well in different scenarios. And another advantage this has is that there is carryover between skills. And that's something I'm really interested in, you know. So again, if we take the role-playing analogy, you know, you can have a character who's a warrior character, and you want to make him more survivable. Well, you can just put more and more points into vitality, so you can just tank more and more hits, right? So you can just basically stand there, you know, pocked full of arrows, and it's just like, this is fine. And this is one way to do that, right? Where you're just maxing that one aspect of this character. But another way to do that is, like, you could increase your dexterity so that you can survive longer in a fight because you dodge more blows. That has the same end effect, essentially, right? You can sustain yourself longer in combat, but that increased dexterity also has other uses in other areas. So maybe it helps you pick a lock or whatever, right? Whatever the game mechanics are. And that's something I'm really interested in. Like, what are skills where if I develop this, I don't have to try and be the world-class best at it, but it gives me an advantage in different areas. An example of this, so these would be transferable skills. And an example of this is communication skills. And I'm very interested in communication skills, and I'm not the world's best, you know, TED Talk on stage presenter. And I'm not the world's most eloquent speaker, and I'm not the world's greatest seducer. I'm not the world's greatest, you know, team leader, but I'm pretty good at all of these things. Or also, we can add to that list, you know, I'm not the best writer in the world, but I'm pretty good at all of those things because I have developed my communication skills, and I've developed in such a way that, you know, that I can deploy my communication skills in these different ways. I can deploy them when I'm speaking on stage or to a camera. I can deploy them when I'm just having a conversation with another person. I can deploy them in writing and so on. So those are the kinds of things I'm more interested in. And again, to me, this all comes down to starting with the idea of, how do I want to live my life? What are my real goals? What are my real drives? And for me, the answer of how to get there simply does not follow a straight and narrow path of specialization.